I learned too late that letting someone tell your story is the same as letting them erase you. My stepmother told 200 mourners I'd been dishonorably discharged. The chaplain folding my father's flag had medevaced beside me in Bahrain. That sentence is the whole story. The rest is just how it happened. My name is Jess Harwell. I'm 41 years old. I retired from the Navy as a flight nurse after 11 years of service, 3 deployments, and 1 afternoon on the flight deck of the USS Baton that left me with burn scars from my wrists to my elbows. I wear long sleeves year-round, even in August, even at a funeral in Ohio where the air feels like wet wool and the asphalt in the church lot is soft enough to leave shoe prints. That morning, I sat in my car for 11 minutes with the air conditioning aimed directly at my forearms. The scars get tight in the heat. They pull when I grip the steering wheel, when I open a jar, when I shake someone's hand for too long. The cold air doesn't fix it. It just numbs the surface enough that I can put my jacket on without flinching when the lining drags across the grafts. I sat there and watched people walk into the church. Some of them I recognized from before I left for college. Most I didn't. I watched Carolyn arrive in a black Lincoln she'd bought with my father's money, get out, and adjust the bow on a wreath by the front door for 90 seconds before she went inside. She tilted it 3 times, then she stepped back, considered it, and tilted it once more. That's the kind of woman my stepmother is. She's been planning how a funeral would look since the day she married my father. I'll tell you the truth about something before I tell you anything else. I hadn't seen my father in person for almost 2 years before he died. We talked on the phone every Sunday. He kept the calls short because Carolyn would come into the room and start cleaning surfaces that didn't need cleaning. I told myself the phone was enough. I told myself I was protecting my daughter, Claire, from a woman who would have spent every visit poisoning a 14-year-old's understanding of her own mother. I told myself my father knew the truth, and the truth was what mattered. All of that was correct. None of it makes me feel better. He died on a Tuesday in July, and the last conversation we had was about whether the maple in the front yard needed to come down. I should have driven up. I had 4 days of leave I hadn't used. I chose the maple instead. That's a cost I chose to pay, and I won't pretend it doesn't sit on my chest some mornings before I'm fully awake. I put my jacket on. I checked the seams of my cuffs in the rearview mirror. I walked across the lot toward the church doors with my shoulders squared, because 11 years of training doesn't leave you, and because I needed every piece of structure I had if I was going to walk through those doors and face her. The vestibule smelled like lilies. Too many lilies. The cloying, half-rotting sweetness of $200 funeral arrangements crammed into a small space with the doors closed. A woman I didn't know handed me a program. I thanked her quietly and stepped to the side to look at it. The cover had my father's name in serif type, Arthur James Harwell, the dates of his birth and death, a photograph of him from 20 years ago, before his hair went white, before he retired from teaching, before Carolyn. I opened the program. The inside page listed the order of service: hymn, scripture, eulogy, military honors, recessional. Under that, in smaller print, was a section titled Surviving Family. It read, Carolyn Harwell, beloved wife. That was the entire entry. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, because I genuinely thought I had missed a line. I hadn't. I wasn't in the program. My daughter wasn't in the program. The cigar box of letters my father kept in his desk for 30 years did not belong, according to this document, to anyone who existed. I felt the scars on my forearms pull tight, the way they do when my heart rate climbs. I flexed my hands once inside my sleeves and let the ache ground me. A voice behind me said, "Oh, Jess, I didn't think you come." Carolyn was standing a foot too close, wearing a black crepe dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage and a string of pearls I recognized from a photograph of my grandmother. She had her hand on my arm before I could step back. She squeezed, the way a woman squeezes another woman's arm when she wants the room to see that they're close. I didn't move. "It's so brave of you to be here," she said, in a voice pitched low enough to sound private and loud enough to carry to the 3 women checking in guests at the table behind her. After everything, I repeated. "You know what I mean." She tilted her head. Her eyes did the thing they always do, where they look sympathetic and calculating at the same time, like an insurance adjuster at a car accident. "I just want today to go smoothly. For your father. He would have wanted that. And frankly," she added, dropping her voice another register, "the VA won't honor the estate claim of a dropout. You know that. Check the Title 38 Class A disbursement guidelines, Carolyn." "Yes," I said, when she didn't respond. "He would have." She held my arm 1 beat longer than was natural. Then she turned to a woman approaching from the parking lot, opened her arms and said, "Margaret, thank you so much for coming. This means the world." I stepped further into the vestibule. There was a small table by the inner doors with extra programs stacked on it, a guest book, and a manila folder. The folder had my name on it in Carolyn's tight, deliberate handwriting. I picked it up. Inside was a photocopy of a probate filing. Sullivan County Probate Court. Case number, file date, the whole thing. I scanned down to the body of the affidavit, and Carolyn's notarized signature at the bottom, and the line in the middle of the second page that read, "The decedent's biological daughter, Jessica Harwell, was dishonorably discharged from the United States Navy and has been estranged from the family for a period of not less than 5 years, and therefore has no standing in the disposition of the estate or related federal survivor benefits." The hearing date was stamped at the top, 6 days from today. She had filed it 11 days before my father died. I want you to understand what I was looking at. She had built a sworn legal document, signed under penalty of perjury, designed to seize a $215,000 house and a $40,500 VA survivor benefit by lying about my military service in a way she could have disproved with a single phone call to the Navy. She had filed it before my father's body was cold, and she had left a copy in a folder with my name on it, in the vestibule of his funeral like a place card. I closed the folder, I set it back on the table. I flexed my hands inside my sleeves until the pull in my forearms was sharper than the noise in my head. Jess. Pastor Evans was at my elbow. Soft-spoken man, mid-60s, a face built for sympathy and the path of least resistance. He'd been my father's pastor for 9 years. He had never once called me. I wanted to say how sorry I am. He said, "Thank you, Pastor. Carolyn mentioned there were some complications with your service record. I didn't want to pry. I just want you to know the church is here for whatever you and she need to work through." I looked at him. I let the silence sit between us for long enough that he shifted his weight. "I did my time, Carolyn." "Of course. I only meant I did my time." He nodded too quickly and excused himself toward the sanctuary doors. I want to pause here for a moment. If you've ever stood in a room where someone you love is being buried, and the person standing closest to the casket has spent 5 years constructing a version of you that doesn't exist, and a building full of people you don't know is about to nod along to that version because it's the only one they've ever heard, then you already understand the rest of this story. You already know what it costs to stay quiet. If you think you know where this is going, keep watching. You don't. I walked into the sanctuary. It was full. 200 people, give or take, in dark suits and dark dresses, fanning themselves with the programs that had erased me. Stained glass light fell in long, slanted bars across the center aisle, full of dust. The air conditioning was running at full capacity and losing. I took a seat in the second row, on the aisle, not the front pew. The front pew had a single reserved card on it that said family. I sat upright, feet flat, hands folded in my lap. The posture you learn at OCS and never quite lose, even when you're trying to. Behind the altar, to the left of the casket, a man in clerical dress was reviewing his notes. Mid-50s, silver at the temples. He stood with his weight evenly distributed, his shoulders square, his eyes moving across the front pews in a slow, deliberate sweep that wasn't pastoral at all. It was the sweep of someone clearing a room. He looked at the casket. He looked at the flag draped across it. He looked at Carolyn settling herself in the front pew, smoothing the crepe of her dress. He looked at me. His gaze stopped for half a second on my shoulders. On the way, I was sitting. Then it moved on. I didn't know his name yet. The program said Chaplain Thomas Miller, USN, Reitenschutting, officiating. I assumed Carolyn had picked him because he was a veteran and it would look appropriate. I assumed he was a stranger. I was wrong about that. I just didn't know it yet. The organ started. The congregation rose. We sang a hymn I didn't know the words to, and I mouthed along because my father would have wanted me to. We sat. Pastor Evans read a scripture passage about valleys and shadows. The air thickened with lilies and human breath, and the low, constant hum of the air conditioning, fighting in August it couldn't win. Then Pastor Evans nodded toward the front pew. Carolyn stood. She smoothed her dress one more time. She walked to the pulpit with her chin slightly lifted, the way she'd practiced, and she set a single sheet of paper on the lectern. She gripped both sides of the wood. She looked out over the 200 faces watching her. She leaned into the microphone. "My husband Arthur," she began, "was a man who believed in honesty. So I owe all of you the honesty he would have wanted, especially about his daughter." I felt the scars on my forearms pull tight under my sleeves, and I gripped the edge of the pew in front of me, my knuckles going white against the old oak, and I did not move. Some of you have asked me over the years why Jessica wasn't around, why she didn't visit, why Arthur stopped mentioning her at the Rotary breakfast. Carolyn paused. She let the pause breathe. She had done this before, in living rooms and church basements, but never with 200 people watching her at once. I never wanted to say Arthur was a proud man. He didn't want anyone to know. A woman 2 pews ahead of me reached for her husband's hand. But the truth, Carolyn said, softening her voice to the pitch she used for confidences, is that Jessica left the Navy under a cloud. Misconduct. I won't say more than that because Arthur wouldn't want me to, but it broke him, and she hasn't held a steady job since. We tried, over the years. Arthur tried. He sent letters, he made calls. She wouldn't come home. She glanced down at the front pew. She didn't look at me. She looked past me toward the back of the church, addressing the strangers more than the family. It's a shame she couldn't handle the discipline. That's why the Navy asked her to leave. The scars on my right forearm tightened so hard I felt the graft line along my wrist begin to burn. I let the pew take the pressure. I counted backwards from 10 in my head, the way I'd been taught to do when a casualty was bleeding out faster than the bird could fly. 10, 9, 8. Carolyn talked for another 4 minutes. She talked about Arthur's patience with his difficult daughter. She talked about how he'd left careful instructions for the estate, knowing Jessica was not in a position to be responsible. She talked about her own quiet years of caring for him while his daughter was off somewhere doing whatever it was she did. She called me a dropout to a room full of nodding heads. She couldn't see the skin grafts pulling tight under my cuffs. Behind the casket, Chaplain Miller was watching the congregation. Not Carolyn. The congregation. His head moved slightly as he tracked the reactions, pew by pew, the small leans and whispered exchanges. He was reading the room the way a junior officer reads a flight deck before launch. When his eyes came back to the front, they found me. Then they dropped to my hands, gripping the wood. He looked at my hands for a long moment. Then he looked away. Carolyn finished. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief that hadn't been wet, folded her single sheet of paper, and walked back to the front pew. A few people murmured, "Bless her," as she passed. She sat down 4 feet from me without looking in my direction. Pastor Evans stood. He cleared his throat. He said something about the service of a good man and the comfort of community, and then he nodded toward Chaplain Miller and stepped aside. The military honors began. 2 sailors I didn't recognize, young first-class petty officers in dress blues, walked up the center aisle in slow synchronized steps. They took their positions at either end of the casket. They lifted the flag from where it lay, and they began to fold it. I had seen this done 43 times. I had stood beside 2 of those folds in dress whites, in hangars on a flight deck, with the smell of jet fuel still on my collar, the memory of rotors so loud you stopped trying to speak and just pointed, the snap of latex gloves before a medevac, the slick, specific heat of a Persian Gulf tarmac coming up through the soles of your boots. I knew the geometry. I knew the count. 13 folds, ending in a triangle of blue and white stars, no red showing, no stripe exposed. The congregation went still. The rustle of paper programs stopped. Someone toward the back coughed once and then swallowed it. The air conditioning hummed. The lilies. The lilies were everywhere, and the smell of them had moved past sweetness into something heavier, almost rotting, the way cut flowers smell when there are too many of them in a closed room. Dust drifted in the shafts of stained glass light above the altar, slow and orange and red, like small embers that wouldn't fall. The petty officers finished the fold. The senior of the 2 held the triangle in his white-gloved hands, turned, and presented it to Chaplain Miller. Miller took it. He brought it against his chest, the way you carry a flag, with his forearms flat under it and his hands cupping the points. He looked at Carolyn, then he looked at me. The protocol for flag presentation at a service member's funeral is that the flag goes to the next of kin, spouse first, child second. By tradition and by federal regulation, the order is fixed. Miller knew the order, Carolyn knew the order, I knew the order. He walked, in measured steps, past the front pew where Carolyn sat with her hands folded and her chin slightly lifted in expectation. He walked past her. He stopped in front of me. I stood. The pew creaked under the shift of my weight, and my knees, which had been locked too long, sent a hot prickle up into my hips. I straightened my jacket. I brought my hands forward, palms up, the way you accept a folded flag, with the elbows close to the body and the wrists held flat. Miller lowered the triangle toward my hands. As I reached, the cuffs of my jacket slid back. 2 inches, maybe a little more. The cotton dragged across the slick, ridged skin from my wrists toward my elbows, and the friction sent a familiar, pulling ache up the inside of my arms. The grafts came into view. They are not subtle scars. They are not pale lines you have to lean in to see. They are wide, mottled fields of pink and brown, the texture of melted plastic that cooled too fast, the donor sites still visible at the edges, where the surgeons had taken healthy skin from my thighs and laid it down in overlapping squares. The scars climb past my wrist bones, wrap the soft underside of my forearm, and disappear up under the fabric where they keep going to my elbows. Miller saw them. He did not jerk. He did not gasp. His hands held the flag exactly where they had been, halfway through the transfer, the cotton resting against my fingertips and not yet released into my palms. His eyes moved. Slowly. From my left wrist to my right wrist to my face. Behind him, the petty officers stood at attention. They did not move. They could not see what he could see. I felt the words come up in my throat before I knew I was forming them. They were not for the church. They were not for Carolyn. They were the words I had whispered every time we lifted off the deck with a casualty in the back. The words my first flight surgeon had taught me my first week aboard. The words I had said over a Marine whose name I would not say in this room. "Keep the deck clear," I whispered. "Bring them home." Miller's posture changed. It was not dramatic. A civilian would not have seen it. But the small, pastoral softness in his shoulders went away, and what replaced it was something I had not seen in a decade. His weight came forward over the balls of his feet. His chin came down a fraction. His jaw set in the particular way of a junior officer about to make a call he was authorized to make and would not unmake. His voice, when it came, was a whisper, meant for me only. "You're favoring your radials," he said. "Flight deck, baton, Z9." I held his eyes. "Yes, sir." He did not say anything else to me. He completed the presentation. He pressed the folded triangle into my hands, and as my fingers closed around the heavy cotton, the scars across my palms and wrists pulled tight in protest, and I held the flag anyway because that was the only thing to do. Then Chaplain Miller turned. He did not return to his place behind the casket. He walked in the same measured steps to the pulpit where Carolyn had stood 8 minutes earlier. He lifted the microphone from its stand. He turned to face the congregation. 200 people watched him. "Before I conclude the service," he said, "I need to address something that was said from this pulpit a few minutes ago. I would not normally do this, but Arthur Harwell was a man who taught history to children for 36 years, and I will not let history be falsified at his own funeral." The air conditioning hummed. Nobody moved. "My name is Thomas Miller. Before I was ordained, I served 11 years in the United States Navy. I was a lieutenant aboard the USS Baton during her 2009 deployment to the Persian Gulf. I was the ship's chaplain, but I spent most of my time on the flight deck, because that was where the casualties came in." He paused. His eyes found Carolyn in the front pew. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward me without turning, "served as a Navy flight nurse aboard that same ship during that same deployment. A flight nurse is the medical officer who flies on medevac helicopters to recover wounded service members. The work is done in the air, under fire, often in the dark, with the patient bleeding out faster than the aircraft can reach a surgical facility. The work requires a level of discipline that most people in this room cannot imagine." A woman 2 pews ahead of me put her hand over her mouth. On the 17th of June, 2009, a CH-53 helicopter caught fire on the flight deck of the USS Baton. There was a Marine inside. The fire response team was 30 seconds out. The pilot was unconscious. Lieutenant Harwell unbuckled the Marine, pulled him through the cabin door, and dragged him clear of the aircraft before the fuel cell went. He let that sit. Her arms were on fire when she did it. They stayed on fire for 9 seconds before the deck crew got the foam on her. She spent 4 months at the burn center in San Antonio. She holds the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for extraordinary heroism, not involving conflict with an enemy. It is the highest non-combat valor award the Department of the Navy issues. The silence in the church was no longer the silence of a funeral. It was the silence of 200 people recalibrating, in real time, every assumption they had brought through the door. This woman didn't leave under a cloud of misconduct. She left because she pulled a burning Marine out of a CH-53 on a flight deck in the Gulf, and her arms paid the price. She wears long sleeves because she holds a Navy and Marine Corps medal. Miller's eyes found Carolyn again. He held them there. "Your daughter," he said, slow and clear, "is one of the most decorated medical officers this state has produced in the last 20 years. and you stood at this pulpit at her father's funeral, and you called her a dropout. Carolyn's face had gone the color of paper. Her hands were no longer folded. They were gripping the edge of the pew the way mine had been 10 minutes earlier, except hers were shaking. She opened her mouth. "That's," she said. The word came out high and thin. She tried again. I was told differently. I have documents." "You have a fraudulent affidavit," Miller said, not loudly, but in the carrying voice of a man who had given briefings. "You filed it with the Geauga County Probate Court 4 days ago. I read it this morning because the funeral home gave me a copy when they asked me to officiate. I am telling you in front of this congregation that the contents of that affidavit are false, and I will be saying so under oath if I am asked to." Carolyn's mouth was still open. No sound came out. I stepped into the aisle. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at the congregation. I held the folded flag against my chest, the way I had been taught to, with my forearms flat beneath it and the points cupped in my palms, and I looked at the woman who had married my father late in his life and spent 5 years rewriting the only thing I had left of him. "You wanted the house, Carolyn," I said. "You didn't have to steal his memory to get it." She tried to speak. Her lips moved. Nothing came. "You spent 5 years rewriting my record," I said. "You never once asked why I couldn't carry his casket." She looked down at her hands. Chaplain Miller set the microphone back in its stand. He walked the length of the center aisle to where I stood holding the flag, and he stopped in front of me, and he brought his right hand up in a slow, deliberate salute. I could not return it. My hands were full. I lowered my head instead, the way you do when you cannot salute and you mean it anyway, and I held my father's flag against my chest, and the scars on my forearms burned under the weight of the sea otten, and I let them burn. The organist did not know what to do. She started the recessional 20 seconds late, and when she did, the notes came out uneven, like she was trying to remember a song she had not played in years. People stood. They did not stand the way people stand at funerals. They stood the way people stand when something has happened that the program did not list. I walked out first, behind the casket, because that was where I had always belonged in that line. Carolyn did not follow. She stayed in the front pew with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the floor, and the people on either side of her shifted half an inch away without seeming to. The August heat hit me in the vestibule like a wall. Chaplain Miller was at my elbow before I reached the door. "Where are you parked?" he asked. "The back lot." "I'll walk you." He did. He did not say anything else until we reached my car, and then he stood there with his hands behind his back the way he must have stood 1,000 times on a quarterdeck, and he looked at the flag in my arms, and he said, "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you before the service." "You couldn't have." "I should have." I shook my head. "I was 26 the last time you saw me? I had hair down to my shoulders, and I weighed 120 pounds. You folded a flag today. That's what mattered." He nodded once. He gave me his card. He told me he would be available to the probate court, the VA, and any federal investigator who needed a statement, and that he would put that in writing before the end of the day. I put the card in the inside pocket of my jacket, against the lining, where I keep things I am not going to lose. I drove home with the flag on the passenger seat and the AC pointed at my wrists. The probate hearing did not happen 6 days later. It was postponed again, then converted into something else entirely. Carolyn's attorney withdrew on the second postponement. The third was the one where the county prosecutor's office asked the court to refer the affidavit to the United States Postal Inspection Service because the VA correspondence Carolyn had intercepted had crossed state lines through the federal mail system, and that is not a county-level offense. I did not sit in any of those hearings. I did not have to. The information reached me the way most information reaches a woman who lives 40 minutes from the town she grew up in. It came through my cousin Rebecca, who still went to the church. It came through the funeral home director who called to apologize for the program. It came through a woman named Linda Voss, who had taught 3rd grade with my father for 18 years, and who left a message on my phone the Tuesday after the funeral saying she had something to tell me when I was ready to hear it. I called her back that evening. Carolyn had been removed from the church flower committee on the Sunday after the funeral. Not formally. The chairwoman had simply not called her about the next meeting, and when Carolyn called to ask, the chairwoman said the slate was full this quarter. The hardware store on Main had called in a $37 balance she had been carrying on account. The Rotary Club, where she had been scheduled to speak about grief and community in October, had quietly moved the date and not told her the new one. Linda told me all of this in the tone of a woman who had watched a long time and had finally been given permission to say what she had seen. Your father knew, she said, near the end of the call. He told me once. He said Carolyn had a way of arranging the truth so it sat where she wanted it. He said he didn't have the energy to keep moving it back. He should have called me. He thought he was protecting you. He was. I let that sit. Linda did not feel it. She was a teacher. She knew when not to. The legal consequences came in writing 2 weeks later in a manila envelope with a Jaga County return address. The probate court had imposed $14,000 in sanctions against Carolyn for the fraudulent affidavit. The house at 412 Sycamore, which my father had paid off in 2003 on a teacher's salary by skipping vacations for 30 years, defaulted to me as the sole surviving child of Arthur Harwell. The VA survivor benefit, $42,500, was reissued in my name with an apology letter signed by a regional director I will never meet. The federal mail fraud investigation was, the prosecutor told me on the phone, ongoing. He did not use the word indictment. He did not need to. He said the file was thick and the timeline was clear and that I would be contacted when they needed a statement. I told him I would be available. Pastor Evans called 9 days after the funeral. I let it go to voicemail. I always let unknown numbers go to voicemail, and his number had not been in my phone for a long time. He left a message that lasted 3 minutes and 40 seconds. I listened to it once, standing at my kitchen counter with a cup of coffee I had let go cold. He said he was sorry. He said he had been wrong to take Carolyn at her word about the obituary. He said he should have called me, and he had not, because he had told himself it was a family matter and not a church one, and he had known, even as he told himself that he was choosing the easier thing. He said he hoped I could forgive him in time. He said the door of the church was open to me whenever I wanted to walk through it. I deleted the message. I did not call him back. Some apologies are real, and some apologies are a man trying to set down something heavy before it bruises him. I am not sure which one his was. I am not required to find out. The cigar box came home with me from my father's study on the Saturday after the funeral. I drove out alone. Carolyn was not there. She had moved to her sister's house in Akron the day after Miller's statement, and the locks on Sycamore had been changed by the county on the Thursday. I let myself in with the key the probate clerk had mailed me, and I walked through the rooms of the house I had grown up in, and I did not cry, because crying in that house had never gotten me anything. His desk was in the same place it had been in 1991. The cigar box was in the bottom right drawer, under a stack of grade books from a school district that no longer existed. I opened the lid in his chair, with the late afternoon sun coming through the window, the way it had come through that window every August of my childhood. The letters were all there, every one I had sent. Bahrain, Yokosuka, Norfolk, the 18-month stretch I had been on the baton and could only write home about the weather. He had kept them in chronological order, banded by year with rubber bands that had cracked and split and been replaced more than once. Under the last bundle, taped to the bottom of the box, was an index card in his handwriting. She flew into the fire. Don't let anyone say, different. I read it twice. I peeled it off the bottom of the box, and I taped it to the inside of the lid, where I would see it every time I opened it. Then I drove home. Claire found me at my desk when she came downstairs. She is 14. She has my father's chin and her own opinions about most things, and a way of looking at me when I walk in the door that always makes me set down whatever I'm carrying. The cigar box was open on the desk in front of me. Is that Granddad's? It's mine now, I said. It was always going to be. She came over and settled into the chair beside the desk. She is tall enough now that I do not have to bend to talk to her, and that still surprises me every time. She read the card first. She read it the way she reads everything, with her lips slightly moving, the way I used to before I learned not to. What does it mean? She asked. It means he knew. Knew what? I pulled back the cuff of my sleeve. I had been wearing long sleeves around her since she was old enough to ask questions, and I had answered the questions she had asked, but I had never sat her down and shown her, and I had never told her the whole of it. I told her the whole of it that evening. The CH-53, the Marine, the fuel line, the 38 seconds it took to get him clear of the airframe, and the 4 months it took to get the graphs to take. The medal that lives in the second drawer of my desk because I have never known where else to put it. The prayer I whispered on the deck that day, that I whispered again at her grandfather's funeral, because some words you learn once and they belong to you forever. She listened the way her grandfather used to listen, without interrupting, with her hands flat on the table. When I finished, she said, "Can I see it?" I rolled the sleeve up to my elbow. She looked at my arm for a long time. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She reached out and put 2 fingers very lightly on the edge of the graft line where the skin changes color. Does it still hurt? Sometimes. At the funeral? Yes. She nodded. She rolled my sleeve back down for me, button by button, the way you do for someone who has done a thing you cannot fully picture but can tell was hard. Then she picked up the index card again. Can I keep this in my room? For a while. Until when? Until you don't need to anymore. She took it upstairs. I sat at my desk after she went to bed. The cigar box was open in front of me. The letters were stacked the way my father had stacked them, and the framed letters from my own deployments, the ones Claire had made me hang on the wall above the desk when she was 9, looked down at the box the way one set of records looks at another when they are finally in the same room. I poured a small glass of bourbon. I did not drink it. I just held it, the way you hold something that belongs to a man who is gone. My wrists ached. I let them. She flew into the fire. He knew the truth, and now, so does the only person left who matters. If you have ever had someone in your life decide who you were and tell that version to everyone who would listen, and watch the people around you nod along because the lie was easier than the truth, I want you to know something. The truth does not need most people to believe it. It needs the right ones. The right ones might be one chaplain in a church you have not set foot in for a decade. The right one might be a 14-year-old at your kitchen table. The right one might be a man who is already gone, who left a note in the bottom of a cigar box because he knew somehow that you would be the one to open it. Tell me in the comments who the right one was for you. The person who saw you when nobody else did. The person who knew. I read every one of these, and I read them at this desk, late, when the house is quiet and the lamp is on and the letters are where I can see them. If you have not subscribed yet, do that now and tap the bell while you're there. I have more stories to tell you, and the next one is already waiting. I'd like you here for it. Good night from Ohio.